From the depths of the wine-dark sea, to use the blind poet Homer's words, where Odysseus flounders close to an inglorious death at the end of Book 5, he sends out a heartfelt prayer. Hear me, Lord, whoever you might be. I come to you as one who is greatly longed for, as I try to escape the sea and Poseidon's menace. I come to your knees after many trials. Pity me, Lord, I am your suppliant. As he ended, the god stemmed the current, held back the waves, and smoothed the water ahead, so bringing him safely and eventually to shore. And he kissed the earth and lay down and covered himself with the fallen leaves. And Athena poured sleep into his eyes and freed him quickly from utter weariness. Next day, he awoke to the sounds of many maidens singing at the shoreline, one of whom was Nausicaa, the daughter of the king and queen who ruled there. Now the Phaeacians, some say, were semi-divine beings, living on the edges of the ancient Greek world, not quite gods or goddesses, but not fully mortal either, more akin to Tolkien's elves or the high fairy folk of Celtic mythology. Nausicaa helps Odysseus, and she guides him to the royal court, where he is offered exemplary hospitality, unlike any encountered thus far, and all before anyone learns his name. Only when he has bathed, eaten, and enjoyed the best cuts of the meat will he be obliged to reveal himself, according to the sacred rules of Xenia. After the feast is over, Demodocus, the king's finest rhapsode, also blind like Homer, sings of the Trojan War for the company's contemplation, but not in a way that glorifies it. No, not at all, for the notes and the key he chooses serve only to express the tragedy and futility of it all, such unbearable loss for victors and the vanquished alike. And remembering, Odysseus breaks down. He clutched at his long purple cloak with his great hands, Homer tells us, and dragged it over his head to hide his handsome face, ashamed lest the Phaeacians see the tears pouring from his eyes. And whenever the divine bard stopped singing, Odysseus wiped the tears away. But when the bard began again, he covered his head once more and groaned. Now the tears are part of his healing for sure, and they will not be fully shed until he is reunited with his beloved Penelope at the very end of the tale. Listening to Demodocus's sad song helps, as the wise point out, but it's not enough simply to listen to others tell one's tale. In order to progress, in order to fully assist the healing process, Odysseus must tell the tale himself. He must take authorship of his own narrative. Homer, of course, sets the paradigm for storytelling in this way, a paradigm that persists to the present day. It was Homer who initiated and established the idea of storytelling as therapeutic. The very word epic refers to a tale with a deeper meaning, a story with a purpose. For somehow in the telling, the teller understands much that was obscured before, and once light is brought to bear upon our pain, we are halfway home. Know thyself. This was the great philosophical maxim inscribed upon the temple of Apollo in the ancient Greek precinct of Delphi. It was the theme too of Asclepius, son of Apollo, whose temples were dedicated to healing through the telling of dreams. These were places where the incurable sick would come to be attended by the therapeutes, the predecessors of our modern-day therapists, who would listen to the stories of their clients, also a word with a Greek derivation, and help them come to a deeper understanding that very often brought healing. Well, by and by, Demodocus completes his long song, and the opportunity arises for Odysseus's hosts, who have seen his tears and are now curious to know why he is affected so profoundly, to ask, as is their prerogative, for his story. Obliged, and yet not really knowing if he is ready, brave Odysseus begins. What follows is his first-person account of the 10-year struggle to find his way back to Ithaca. It will take 2 nights in the telling, and it will not be until the second night that he will reveal his name. At first, he tells only of how he has just been released from Calypso's island. The gods must have pitied him, he tells King Alcinous and the company, for they knew he longed for home, even though Calypso was utterly irresistible, more beautiful by far than Penelope, but she never won his heart, he tells them. In the end, the gods insisted she free him, but he did not get far, for Poseidon discovered him, as we already know, overturned his vessel, and pulled him down to the depths to drown. Luck and the gods were with him, he tells his kind hosts, for the next thing he knew, he was waking up upon their own hospitable shores. Well, on the second night, Demodocus sings again, this time of the Trojan horse, the final battle of Troy, and the cruel slaying of men, women, and children within its walls. Odysseus is undone. He weeps openly once more, and his hosts insist he must now reveal his true identity. Tell us the name you go by at home, they insist, the name your mother and father gave you, and tell us why you weep and sorrow in spirit when you hear Demodocus sing. Speak true. Where have your wanderings taken you? What countries of men have you seen? Tell me of those peoples and their crowded cities, the cruel, savage, and lawless races, and those who are good to strangers, and in their hearts fear the gods. I am Odysseus, the guest admits at last, and my home is sunny Ithaca. He tells them then of all that transpired after leaving the fallen city. With heavy hearts for our loyal friends lost, our fleet sailed to Ismarus, home to a barbaric people called the Cicones, who had fought with the Trojans in the war. We sacked the town, he says, But the men lingered after the battle against my orders, which gave the Cicones time to call in reinforcements, who soon arrived in great number and slaughtered many of my men. Depleted in number, we set sail again, and after many days and nights upon the grey sea, we came to the island of the Lotus Eaters, a realm of great distraction, of heady fragrance and opiate sap, easy for a man to forget his troubles under such potent enchantment, easy to forget what they were really about, the voyage home, easy to forget their wives and children awaiting them, their futures yet to unfold. Yet these war-damaged souls succumbed in an instant to the honey-sweet fruit, so broken were they in spirit, so lost and traumatized by what they had seen, what they had become. I dragged those men back to the shore myself by force while they wept, Odysseus tells his listeners, and I bound them tight in the hollow ships, pushing them under the benches, before safely setting sail once more. And with sad hearts then we came to the island of the Cyclopes. Odysseus then recounts the tale of the one-eyed Cyclops Polyphemus, one of Poseidon's sons. Upon arrival, the men went seeking food and came upon Polyphemus's cave whilst he was away tending his sheep. The cave was well stocked with food, which the men began to eat without invitation. When Polyphemus returned, he was irate. He sealed them in the cave with a gigantic boulder and started eating the men. Now, Odysseus, renowned for his wit and cunning, tells how he quickly devised a plan. He charmed Polyphemus, relaxing and plying him with wine that he'd never tasted. Polyphemus asked Odysseus his name, and he cunningly told him, Nobody is my name." More wine was then consumed, and eventually Polyphemus fell asleep, at which point the men sharpened the end of a wooden stick, poked Polyphemus in the eye, and blinded him. In agony he cried out to the other Cyclopes on the island, who all came at once to his aid, calling back to him from just outside the cave. But when they asked him, "What has happened?" he cried, "Nobody is killing me! Nobody is killing me!" The other Cyclopes took him at his word then, and departed, leaving him utterly without help. But the men still needed to get out of the cave without Polyphemus knowing. Odysseus had another brilliant idea, and next morning, when Polyphemus drew back the boulder to let out his sheep, the men got out too, undetected, tied to the underbellies of the animals. Odysseus and his men then made their way back to the ships and set sail, full of pride, the sin detested so by the gods, and Odysseus was unable to resist the temptation to reveal his true name to the enraged, blinded creature as they sped away from the island. An immature lapse of judgment for which he would pay dearly. For not only did Polyphemus hurl a massive boulder at the boat, practically causing it to capsize, but he prayed to his father Poseidon, pleading with him to make Odysseus's journey home as difficult as possible. And so it is with pride. The price we pay is often greater than we know. They sailed on then to the god of the winds. He helped Odysseus by giving him a bag containing all the ill winds, so he might sail directly home. But when they came within sight of Ithaca, their beloved home, the crew became suspicious, and they opened the bag whilst Odysseus was sleeping, thinking it contained treasure he intended to keep for himself. But alas, upon opening, the winds were all released, blowing them all the way back to the god of the winds, who refused to help them a second time and sent them quickly on their way. They set sail again, and very soon arrived at the Isle of the Lastrygonians. These men were heartless cannibals who devoured almost all of my men and my ships, Odysseus tells his hosts. Only my ship was spared, as the gods would have it, along with the crew on board. So we sailed on with heavy hearts for the loyal friends lost, though happy to have escaped death ourselves. And we came to the island where Circe of the lovely tresses lives. A seasoned enchantress, equally as alluring and as dangerous as Calypso. She enthralls several of the scouts that Odysseus sends ahead with delicious food and strong wine, and then she promptly turns them into pigs, the animals they most resemble at this stage of the journey, it is said. But Odysseus is forewarned and helped by Hermes, who gives him a herb that enables him to resist her charms. And when she tries to enchant him in the same way, she fails. Of her attempt to enslave him, Odysseus says, "She gave me the cup, and I drank, but it did not bewitch me. So she struck me with her wand and said, 'Off to the sty with the rest of your friends.'" But, and this is worthy of note, when Odysseus proves impervious to her charms, she immediately transforms into the most perfect host, bathing and inviting the weary traveller to her bed, and meeting his every need, including restoring his men to their rightful form. It is an interesting turnabout from aggressor to perfect host, yet it is often the way. We have to show we cannot be taken and release ourselves from victim mode. The only trouble is, Circe is so perfect in her attentions, Odysseus and his men forget all about Ithaca and end up lingering on her island for almost a year. In the end, it is Odysseus's men who remind him of the task at hand. Circe, unlike Calypso, is more than willing to let her lover go at this point, and she even helps him find his way to the underworld, which is his next port of call, whereas Calypso, even when the time came, struggled to overcome her possessive obsession with Odysseus, and she even tried to bribe him with the promise of immortality, as we know. In the footsteps of the Bronze Age goddesses like Inanna, Ishtar, and Persephone, Odysseus then descends into the shadowy realms of the underworld to seek knowledge from the blind prophet Tiresias. Such visits will become a standard feature of the epic poem as it evolves through Virgil's Aeneid, Dante's Divine Comedy, and Milton's Paradise Lost. with mysterious libations, sacrificial offerings, and strange incantations revealed to him by Circe, he summoned the souls of the dead. The first to come forward was Elphenor, one of his men who'd got left behind on Circe's island. He'd got drunk at the thought of never now returning home, and had fallen from the rooftop just the night before. He begs Odysseus to establish a proper grave for him when he returns above, as his soul cannot rest without such provision. Tiresias, the blind prophet, then appears, and he warns him about Poseidon's persistent hostility, and tells him to caution his men against harming the cattle of Helios if they ever make it that far. If Odysseus fails to command his men in this respect, Tiresias predicts that his ship and company will all be destroyed. He then meets his mother, Anticlea, who he didn't even realize had died. She tells him about the terrible situation back home, of Penelope's plight, the unruly and insolent suitors, their flagrant abuse of her hospitality, and their plan to murder his son Telemachus, and she urges him to return as swiftly as he can. He then meets Agamemnon and his dear friend Achilles. Agamemnon tells him of his murder by his wife Clytemnestra upon returning home from Troy, and Achilles admits that he would have rather lived the life of a simple farmhand than the life of glory as a warrior. Salutary words indeed, Homer's own message perhaps, concerning the essential futility of war, no doubt. The descent is the great turning point in the tale, for here the initiate comes to understand much that was hitherto obscured. From Elphenor, his crewman, whose welfare he overlooked, he realizes his immaturity as a leader. From his mother, Anticlea, he comes to know of the plight of Penelope and Telemachus, and from Tiresias he discovers much about his possible future and the obstacles he must face. Well, Odysseus then returned briefly to Circe, who forewarns him of the sirens whom he will encounter next, and warns him of their fatal charms and perilously sweet song that no man can resist. He must stuff his crew's ears with wax and have them bind him to the mast if he insists upon hearing it. Only then might he survive to tell the tale and sail on safely by. In the Divine Comedy, the sirens appear to Dante in an erotic dream from which Virgil has to wake him. They promise everything, but to yield to their charms effectively forecloses the quest. Next, he would come upon the challenges of Scylla and Charybdis. Charybdis was a treacherous whirlpool that could suck up a ship and its crew into its vortex within seconds. Scylla, a horrifying sea monster with 12 tentacle-like arms, who lurked on the cliff nearby, grabbing sailors from their vessels as they passed. "Hug the cliff," Circe warned him. "It's better to mourn 6 men than to lose them all and the ship too." The men heeded her advice, but many were still grabbed and devoured by the monster. But without a backward glance, the diminished crew pressed on. So many had set forth from Troy. Now just one ship and a few men remained. Odysseus was determined to get them home, and he warned them repeatedly as they approached the island of Helios not to kill and eat the cattle. He watched them like a hawk when they reached that place, but eventually he had to sleep, and that's when they made their move, just as they had before, when they'd let out all the winds, just as dear Ithaca was within sight. Zeus took revenge immediately, and none survived, except a heartbroken Odysseus, who drifted aimlessly on the ocean until he came all alone to Calypso's island, which is a story already told to the Phaeacians, so he ended there. Tears streamed once more from his eyes as he concluded his tale. His audience had been spellbound throughout.